استهدفت سفينة شحن عسكرية أمريكية
Ladies and gentlemen, peace be upon you. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you at this webinar, which comes as one in a series of Emirates Policy Center. And this one aims to discuss the escalation in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The threats of the Houthi groups supported by Iran to the safety and security of the Sea of Bab el-Mandab and the Arab Sea since November 2023 with the claim of supporting Palestinian people. The United States formed an international coalition calling it the Guardian of the Sea in order to protect the navigation in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, especially after the failure of American diplomatic efforts to stop the Houthis from continuing their attacks against the chain supplies vessels in the Red Sea. And as the US and the United Kingdom on the 12th of January 2024 started implementing their strikes against the Houthis to affect their abilities to continue their attacks in the sea, and the response of the Houthi against those strikes, which started against American and British ships. This escalation increases the fear that things would get out of control and there will be more tension in the Red Sea, which put a long-term threat not only for regional security, but also for the international trade. So around 12% of international trade goes through Bab el-Mandab Strait, and also 10% of oil exports go through the same area, and also 8% of liquefied gas pass through that. And the fact that many international companies have changed the routes of their vessels to another strait, which is the Cape of Good Hope, this led to an increase in the charges and cost of transportation, and then we have seen around 30% of as decrease of the vessels that go through the Red Sea. So the escalation of the Houthis in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden has opened the door to more piracy that starts from the Somali area, and as the new activities were focused against the threats of the Houthi, and we have seen so many piracy actions, and the pirates controlled the 2 trade vessels. Such escalation could compromise the international United Nations endeavors to solve the crisis in Yemen and the latest understandings between the Houthi and the United Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, especially in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, especially if the United States and its allies want to move from the strategy of limiting the capacities of the Houthi to target the navigation to a strategy of land intervention and support of the legitimate government and other powers. The current conflict in the Red Sea and the fact that the US and its European partners are keeping to mobilize their weaponry to attack the Houthis means there will be more threats to regional safety and also more militarization in the region of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And we have seen lately how international powers such as India has also deployed military vessels to provide more protection to the navigation of ships. And the European Union has also formed a military maritime power for the same purpose. And as part of this change of the situation in the sea for the Houthis and supporting Iran, and with this return of the piracy in Somalia, there is a need for an involvement at the international level so that we can come up with new arrangements for safety in the Red Sea, and also the preventative measures for the threats against navigation in the Red Sea and the Strait of Bab el-Mandab could give a big push to the project of strategic corridors that would mitigate those threats, like the corridor of India, Middle East, Europe, which was launched in the summit of the New Delhi in September 2023, or even the Arab route for transportation. And in order to forecast the escalation that is taking place in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden and its impact on regional safety and international trade and its impact on projects of strategic routes, Emirates Policy Center is organizing this webinar, which will discuss 3 themes. The first theme is the possible scenario for the escalation between the Houthis and the United States. The second theme, impacts of the current escalation and its development on the Yemeni crisis and on the situation in the region and international interest. The third theme is about political and security arrangement and alternative solutions. And to discuss these 3 themes, we are pleased to have an elite of participants and experts. We have Ambassador Karim Hajjaj, who is Professor of Practice at the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy and Director of the Institute of Middle East Studies in Cairo, and also Dr. Eleonora Ardimagni, Senior Associate Research Fellow at the Italian Institute for International Political Studies and Professor of Economic, and also previous analyst for the College of Defense at the NATO. And also we have with us Mr. Mohammed Bahaoun, Director General and the founding partner of Dubai Public Policy Research Center, Bahut, and also Mr. Majid Al-Madhaji, co-founder of the Sana'a Center for Strategic Studies and its former executive director, and also Dr. Albadr Alshateri, professor at the UAE College of Defense, and also with us Dr. Omer Taspina, professor at the National West College at Washington. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us at this webinar. And I welcome those who are following us on Zoom and other platforms of our center. And I would like to draw your attention that we have simultaneous translation of this Zoom in both languages, Arabic and English. And we start immediately with the themes of this webinar, with the first theme, which discusses the possible scenarios of the escalation. And I direct my question, first of all, to Mr. Majid Al-Madhaji. Mr. Majid, the Houthis justified the attacks on the Israeli-bound vessels as support for Palestine, but there are some who consider that as just an allegation that they want to keep being supporting Iran, and they want to enhance the position inside Yemen. How do you see the situation from your own perspective, Mr. Majid? Yes, thank you very, very much, Dr. Ibtisam, for this introduction. And thank you for organizing this webinar and this important topic. And this hard intervention of the Houthis, it redefines the Houthis in general. It moves its nature and its interaction from being a local player in the Arabian Peninsula, and it acts with other regional players. So he is moving to a higher level, and so this defines the role and missions and the political privileges of the Houthis. So this is a whole change in the positions of the Houthis, and we can say that this hard confrontation in the Red Sea by the Houthis, it's putting a new path for this group of the Houthis and also for the war of Yemen. Second, they are saying that they are moving the role from resistance to making more political gains. And for Iran, this is something important. So they are putting their finger on the most important corridor in the area after Hormuz, and they put another defense line besides Hezbollah for the interest of Iran. So this kind of intervention will have long-term impact. But what is hard in this path is that it comes as we see international response. That international response, those who do it, they don't know what they do. They are working on it from a security perspective. We'll talk about that in the other themes. Dr. Omar. Let me move to Dr. Eleonora. Although the Europeans are among the parties affected by hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So although the European are among the parties affected by the attacks against the routes of supply chains in the Red Sea and the Gulf and the Bab el-Mandeb, but they refrained from taking part in the attacks against the Houthis, and they formed lately maritime power that would protect the maritime trade. So my question to you, to what extent the European approach is successful in dealing with the Houthi threat? Dr. Eleonora.
Thank you, Dr. Abdissam, for your question and for this kind invitation. In my view, the current European approach to the crisis in the Red Sea has not been working so far. And most of all, I see that the US, the UK, and on the other hand, the EU have parallel goals in dealing with the Red Sea crisis, and so with the Houthi threat to freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb. While the US and the UK aim to tackle the crisis, undermining the Houthis' offensive capabilities, and this was the goal of the establishment, first of all, of the Prosperity Guardian, which is a defensive operation, but it was immediately followed by the US and the UK airstrikes against the Houthi military sites in the northwest of Yemen. So while the US and the UK aim to undermine the Houthis' military capabilities, the EU, in my view, is basically interested in mitigating the commercial side of the threats. So these are two parallel goals. Someone could see these goals as complementary. I think that now that Western allies and GCC partners share the same threat perception at last with regard to the Houthi threats, it would be extremely good to build a common ground policy between US, UK, EU, and the GCC states on how to deal with the Houthi issue in order to address in the medium to long term the stabilization in the Red Sea area, since in my view the Houthis are not going to stop in the short term their attacks in the Red Sea. And I agree with Mr. Al-Madashi, who said that the Houthis are capitalizing on the Gaza war, and in my view, they are exploiting the Gaza war in order to advance their own interests and agendas. So it would be extremely useful to find a common policy ground between Western players and GCC states who are the neighbors of Yemen and who are extremely affected by this crisis.
I think the Gulfies or the GCC, long time they were aware of that, and that's why they had that war with Houthi. They've been trying to warn the European, the American, how dangerous is this group? But nobody at that time was listening, and I think Hudaydah Station was really an example for that. Anyhow, we'll come back to this. And
now I move to Ambassador Karim Hajjaj. Ambassador Karim, Egypt is one of the countries in the region that was affected by the escalation in the Red Sea, and according to some figures, the returns of Suez Canal decreased by 46% on an annual basis, starting with the with the beginning of the escalation, but yet Egypt did not join that alliance. So how does Egypt deal with the threats of the strategic interests? Thank you to Emirates Policy Center for inviting me and for this important dialogue. Regarding your question, definitely Egypt is probably one of the regional countries affected by the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. And its threat of international navigation and Suez Canal, because Suez Canal achieves very important returns for Egyptian economy. Regarding the position of Egypt, Egypt is one of the countries that refrained from joining the military operation led by the US called the Guardian of Prosperity. And we should notice that it was not only Egypt who took that position. Most of the regional powers did not join this operation. Saudi Arabia did not want to join, although they are strongly involved in settlements of the Yemeni conflict, and the same thing for the UAE. Most of the regional power did not want to get involved in such operation. And the reason for that, and we should acknowledge this fact, is the success of the Iranian policy of unifying the coast. Iran managed to unify all the scenes interested in the Palestinian conflict, and this what allowed the Ansar Allah groups to start resistance using the slogan of resistance against Israel. And this development has changed the reaction of Europe and other countries, although most regional countries with Egypt, they are impacted by such development. There are some procedures with the handling of this topic. So they're thinking about some incentives to encourage ships to start using Suez Canal to diminish the fees, but this is not sufficient to overcome the damage that affected the navigation in the sea with the threats and dangers that they are facing in Bab al-Mandab Strait with the Houthi attacks. So we need to reevaluate the whole situation. We need to acknowledge that what is happening in Gaza Strip, the ongoing war and escalation, it can escalate further in the future, and this will have an impact on the south front with the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. So we need a regional approach and not a local one linked to the situation of the Red Sea. We need to handle this crisis, this regional crisis, in a holistic way with the attacks. Should take the war in Gaza and the Houthi attacks as same elements of the crisis. We have also Dr. Omar Tashpina from Washington. Dr. Omar. How do you evaluate the goals of the coalition, the Guardian of Prosperity, and the efficiency of American and British airstrike to undermine the capabilities of the Houthis to threat navigation in the Red Sea?
We have to, thank you for the question, Dr. So we have to keep in mind that for the United States, there is a need to maintain a certain level of de-escalation of the whole situation in the Middle East. So the idea of engaging the Houthis militarily was taken with a lot of reluctance, with the fear that any military escalation, any US kinetic action against the Houthis would undermine the peace process that is going on with Saudi Arabia. So one eye of American strategy is always trying to figure out whether there is still a diplomatic solution, a political solution that is underway. But this decision to actually resort to military action was taken at the end of the day by the fact that the Houthis were hard to deter, that they were undermining trade, and that a strong message had to be sent. Now, recently, when 3 US service members were killed by Iranian proxies, the debate changed in the United States, and there was a firmer determination to act against all Iranian proxies, including the Houthis. And that's why we have seen, in addition to attacks in Syria and Iraq, a escalation of the attack now of military strikes against Houthi centers. However, I think that the US strategy overall still believes that there's a need to coordinate strongly with the Saudis and also the Emiratis, in the sense that there is this belief that a military solution to the Houthi problem simply does not exist, that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have tried for years to actually deal with this problem militarily, and they came to the conclusion that it is impossible to destroy the Houthis. Even to deter them is difficult. They have certain capacities. You need to have boots on the ground. You need to have some different military approach in order to deal with the threat more effectively. So overall, what I see in US strategy is one of deterrence, trying to deter the Houthis, which is not really working at this point because they're still able to send drones or missiles. But I think at least for public consumption, there was a need to do something. There was a need to actually go beyond sanctions, beyond the terrorist designation. And even the terrorist designation, as it has often been noted, is not the most effective terrorist designation, which still leaves room for some humanitarian aid groups to be active in Yemen. So in a nutshell, the United States is not giving up on a political solution to the Houthi problem.
Comment that it's not the Emirati and Saudi, they thought that it's right. There was at that time no military solution, but if US, EU, UN did not stop them when was about to reach the victory in Al-Hudaydah, it will be a totally different scene. But and also the West left them facing Al-Houthi alone. Well, it wasn't at that time, shows that it's not only about Yemen, and Houthi is a proxy for Iran. Thank you. I move here to
now I will ask the question to Mr. Mohammed Baha on although the Gulf states have been impacted by the escalation in the Red Sea, but they refrained from joining the coalition of the Guardian of Prosperity, exception of the Bahrain. The question is, what are the limits of the Gulf policies towards this escalation? Thank you, Doctor, for the invitation and for being with you in this discussion. I think the point mentioned by the Ambassador Karim Hajjaj is very important, and the point about the approach for dealing with the Houthis is probably unilateral. they don't look at the regional interactions. And we look at a military, plain military involvement, no economic or political sides. The regional coalitions that we have seen so far for maritime safety, some of them were at the long term, but even those were not did not have clear outcomes. There are other missions, but they're still suffering from, like Atlanta mission. It's a mission against piracy. The last coalition was limited, and it was a response to the Houthis and its form. It was not long-lasting because even designation of the Houthis was designed to their attack. So it's limited tactics to the deterrence of the Houthis. The mechanism of deterrence was tried before. The military coalition against the Houthis by Arab and Islamic countries, they did the same thing. And unfortunately, there was no outcomes. And I don't think that the current coalition and the way they work, they will be able to achieve any results. As an observer, I can say that even the US did not present a holistic approach of dealing with the Houthis issue. And also for the post-war, at least like the Houthis are saying now, the operations, they are connected to the war in Gaza. If they say if there is a ceasefire, they will stop the operation. But the political understanding to put Yemen outside of this conflict, they can be long-lasting. So what I can, so if they join operation and then go back to those operation and then they start striking the Houthi, well, I don't think there is a balance between what is acquired, what can be achieved, and the possible damage in the future. Dr. Badr, to what extent do you think that the classification by the US of the Houthis as a terrorist organization will contribute in their deterrence? Dr. Albadr, you are on silent. Can you hear me now? Peace be upon you. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you to Emirates Policy Center for this webinar. To answer your question, we should remember that we should be aware of few things when we deal with the Houthis. Houthis, they do not have any relationships with the other organization or states in the world. So the classifications of terrorist organization did not affect them. The Houthis, they have not much to lose. We have seen that there was a war for almost a decade. It did not impact them. So the problem is that the deterrence doesn't work against a group that doesn't worry about any damage. It's a psychological issue between two parties. A party that want to threaten and endanger the other party, or want to use their weapon so they can deter that the party, but this will require a response from that other party. If there is no response, then nothing happens. And there is an important point, is that with the support of Gulf states and Arab states and the Arab coalition in Yemen, with the issuance of United Nations resolution to have legitimate government in Yemen. But what happened, unfortunately, is that the international willpower, they gave up on having legitimacy in Yemen. So there is no more trust in the Gulf states with those countries who say that the Houthis are threatening. Yes, they do threaten navigation and security. They were like that for 10 years or more. But those countries, they give up on them. So this question of trust has diminished, and I don't think that they will support those efforts. And those efforts, although they may be good to avoid the destabilization of peace in the Red Sea, but that happened because there is a need to protect Israel, and the Arab states, they feel embarrassed to join those operations. And there is a need for an international and regional approach. Thank you. Mr. Majid, in your opinion, what will happen for the Houthis in case the war in Gaza becomes an open war and expands to Lebanon? Would the Houthis expand their operation in the Red Sea? And in case the war stops in Gaza, would the Houthis really stop their operation in the Red Sea? I can ask you, please, to be short because we still have 2 more themes. I think with the war in Gaza, if the war doesn't shift to the south of Lebanon, maybe the Houthi would stop, but it doesn't mean that they will not be using Bab el-Mandab Strait on other occasions, because now the appetite is open, and any political incident that happen in the future, they may use the same strategy, and also they will move this to the axis of resistance. We can imagine different scenario, and like if Sweden burns the Quran, then they may be victims of attacks by the Houthis. So we'll not witness a big change in the approach. Mr. Majid, if you can answer quickly, do the Houthi do what they're doing now just by themselves, or is it part of the Iranian strategy? I can answer quickly and say that the Houthis, they like the battle and they are committed towards the Palestinian issue. But, and this is among the causes that they defend in the axis of resistance. So they have the first opportunity to have a confrontation with their enemy, and they have also the US. So they are achieving the idea of solidarity with Gaza and to be with the axis of resistance. Thank you. Dr. Tachbina, there are some analysts in the US who say that the best option to face the escalation by the Houthis in the Red Sea is to combine deterrence and diplomacy. How do you think such approach would be successful?
So I think the only way it can be successful is to find mediation. There needs to be an understanding that any diplomacy with the Houthis is partly indirect. So the understanding in the US is that after many years, we are at a point, ironically, where there is military escalation now, where there is still hope of a diplomatic solution. And that solution is the one that Saudi Arabia is pursuing with the Houthis. And so as you framed in your question, there has to be a balance so that while the United States is still taking kinetic action, military action, in order to deter the Houthis, there has to be a hope that the negotiations going on with Saudi Arabia and a certain level of power sharing within Yemen can bring stability. However, there is also a greater picture here, a bigger picture, that as long as the war in Gaza continues, as long as there is the risk of an escalation of war between Israel and Hezbollah, potentially involvement of other proxies and the United States attacking proxies, the last cycle of escalation that we see in the United States in the last weeks, the United States has decided to take multi-tiered action against Iranian proxies. These dynamics of escalation, albeit limited, do not bode well for diplomacy in terms of the Yemen-Saudi dynamics or Yemen power-sharing dynamics as well. As long as there will be a larger conflict in the Middle East, the hope of a diplomatic success, a political solution, or power-sharing arrangements in Yemen will be diminished. This is why U.S. is involved in this activity, military activity, hoping that somehow Israel can de-escalate, and this ceasefire with Hamas will prove very critical, because the only time where there has been de-escalation has been during the 8 days when there was a ceasefire, temporary ceasefire in Gaza. Let's see if current ceasefire that is probably going to take weeks, and the refugee deal, the hostages deal, may bring some stability. There is a hope that it may bring some stability overall to the military dynamics in the Middle East.
Dr. Eleonora, Iran is considered as the big elephant in the room. As we are within this escalation, and the question is, what can the Europeans do in terms of pressure on Iran to make sure that there will be no more escalations by the Houthis?
I feel the EU and European countries still rely upon US decisions in the Middle East. So I don't see active European diplomacy or a single European state diplomacy in order to de-escalate the Red Sea crisis, and most of all, try to solve the broader scenario of crisis and most of all Iran destabilizing activities in the region. The EU perception on the Houthis has definitely changed after the start of the attacks in the Red Sea against shipping. And at the end of the day, the Europeans are understanding that Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, had understood years ago that the Houthi were a potential threat not only to the regional picture but also to maritime security. And so I don't see a prominent European role in trying to solve this crisis. I think that the Europeans still believe that solving the Gaza war will bring to more stability also in the Red Sea. But in my view, we don't have to take for granted that in case the Gaza war stops, the Houthis will stop their attacks. I think the Houthis understand now that this kind of attacks are really a game changer for regional and global stability. And so in the medium to long term, they could resume attacks in order to advance their own interests. So I think that the EU still rely upon the US also in trying to solve or mitigate this crisis.
Dr. Badr, we have seen how India sent 10 military vessels to the Arab Sea to support the protection of maritime trade. The question, why didn't India join the Guardian of Prosperity initiative? And can we see more Indian military presence in the region in the future? I think if you remember in the days of piracy in the Gulf of Aden by Somalia, China sent some military vessels to protect the trade vessels so that they can cross this significant strategic corridor. So for India, the trade with the Middle East and with other countries is very important. This is a very important corridor for them. But why didn't they join? Maybe it's because of domestic policies in India, but I don't have a specific answer of why India did not join that coalition. Maybe because they look at it as a Western coalition and they don't want to join it. But I can't give an opinion on that. I think that the Indian approach, maybe we can put next to it the Chinese approach, that if China, not as a member of the coalition, because China will not accept to join under the leadership of the US, but as a diplomatic political approach, if they want to mitigate the escalation in cooperation with the US, which because of the situation in the HC, they may try to de-escalate the situation in Gaza and to put pressure on Israel so that there will be less impact of this war. Thank you. I will put a question to every one of you. And so the question is to all of you. And if you can answer briefly before we move to the next theme, Dr. Hajjaj. So this is a question that will be addressed to everyone. So what do you expect for the escalation in the Red Sea? Will be witnessing an end to this escalation, or would it expand in terms of operations and targets? Dr. Karim, quickly, if you can, please. The most possible scenario is that the confrontation will continue. Maybe there will be ongoing escalation, but the question is, will this escalation will be calculated? Will there be any limits to it, like we see between Israel and Hezbollah in the south? So there is escalation, but it is limited. There are some rules between both parties. Therefore, there is escalation, but within certain limits, and it's agreed upon. But will this dynamic govern what is going on in the Red Sea, or will we see escalation, more escalation? This will be decided by different factors. Those factors, they have not been sorted out yet. And we have the situation in Gaza and the fact that the confrontation between the Houthis and the Americans is a new development on the confrontation scene compared to other scenes of confrontation, like with Syria and Iraq. So the confrontation between the Houthis and the US is kind of new. It was limited before on the 16th when the US responded to the Houthis attack. So the rules of the games, they are not agreed upon yet. They are just being formed at the moment. So there are many factors that would be tending towards escalation. Maybe there will be limited escalation, but the situation is open to more escalation and the confrontation will be harder between the parties. Thank you, Mr. Mohammed. For the possible scenarios, I think there could be a direct impact. There will be a truce in Gaza, and the Houthis will announce that they stopped their attack. So this is a possible scenario, and then the Houthis will declare victory, and they will say that we contributed in that. I agree with the colleague, and the role of this operation. The second scenario is that this operation may continue with more or less numbers, given the limited capacities of the Houthis, but we can expect there will be more targeting of oil and gas vessels, and many companies have already started diminishing their vessels, and maybe there will be more piracy, and maybe there will be some special units that will be attacking vessels. The least expected scenario is to have a land intervention war, especially as the US would say that the main way to put pressure on the Houthis is to liberate the Hodeidah port. And the US, if it joins directly, if it gets involved directly, it may send forces, but this will have a negative impact on the political situation in Yemen. But it could have an impact, and we will see the use of the populist movement in Iraq, Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi and Iraq, and we have seen it became a worse problem. Mr. Majid, in my opinion, it's linked to different factors. What is the future of the war in Gaza, like the colleague said? So where the Houthis want to go with this war, but there is a main thought here is that the Houthis, they have become an important element in deciding of the direction of the situation in the Red Sea, especially if they manage to get out of this war, and their appetite will be open to more intervention and operation, and then they will try to have more impact on the future of operation. And the other thing is that if there's strikes, if we have seen some casualties from the military, from the soldiers from the coalition, that may change the path of intervention. I agree with Mr. Bahaoun that the military option in the Yemeni coast was not successful, but it's putting itself again on the table, and where they are starting to think about it now, and it's still on the table now, especially that we cannot disconnect the political discussions in the Yemen with what is happening in the Red Sea, because it's the same player. So we cannot disconnect both parts. We cannot think about having peace inside Yemen and an escalation and the Red Sea. The third scenario is the need for the access of the resistance with the war in the south of Lebanon between Hezbollah and Israel. If there is more escalation, then the Houthis will have more things to do. They may start also sending missiles, and this is linked to the military situation of the axis of resistance. So the paths in Bab al-Mandab, so this has, Bab al-Mandab has opened an unexpected front, but the main determinant here is that the Houthis are the winner. Dr. Taspinner.
I think we are likely to see more of the same in the form of limited military engagement from the United States coalition, proportional and targeted strikes against Houthis, unless two developments occur. If there is US military casualties, if there is a Houthi missile that manages to impact US or British Navy. If there are casualties, there will be military escalation. The proportional nature will require that there will be much more serious strikes against the Houthis. So right now, as long as the Houthi missiles and drones are targeting commercial shipping, the military answer will be proportional and targeted. The second scenario under which we may see a different dynamic is if there is a long ceasefire, as it is probably unfolding in Gaza. There, the United States will be watching the situation, whether the ceasefire is creating stability, not only in the Red Sea, but also in other fronts in terms of Iranian proxies. That may also bring some much more positive stability.
Very shortly, I think that unfortunately the Red Sea crisis will be the new normal in the short term. Two events, in my view, can change a bit the picture. First of all, a durable ceasefire in Gaza, as many colleagues said before, and the second, ground operation led by Yemeni forces, I think, for instance, the SPC, Southern Transitional Council, or to the West Coast forces led by Tarek Saleh, in order to liberate the Hodeida, the areas of the western coast of Yemen held by the Houthis, with the external support of the US and the UK. But this second event, this hypothesis will at the same time bring to a resurgence of violence in Yemen. So this will be a detriment of Yemen's stability.
Now I shift to the second theme, which is the impact of the current escalation on the Yemen, and its impact on the Yemeni crisis and security and peace in the region. And I'll start with Majid. Majid, what is the impact of the current confrontation between the Houthis and the US on the understanding between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia? Would we witness a new war between both parties? I think this is one of the possibilities. We have already started witnessing that. In my opinion, the political titles that we had before 7th of October in the war in Gaza, they are not available now. They are not on the table now after what happened. Not in that way. We cannot imagine that the Houthis, they give up on a big deal that was provided by Saudi Arabia during the negotiations of peace. And the Houthis, they were given the whole state with some waivers. So the current version that they gave up on, it was a surprise and bold decision by the Houthis. And they are showing a different position. It's kind of manipulation, but they cannot imagine to go back to that path of negotiation. The international position towards the Houthis has changed. They are not looked at now in that same way. The parties that were involved in that coalition led by Saudi Arabia, they had that option of negotiation, but now they start talking about a military part, and the head, the chief of the military council spoke about that. And I think that the main investment of the Saudi Arabia of understanding with the Houthis, they have lost it quickly. So we will see impacts of that, and peace on the coast now is no longer available, given what the Houthis did in terms of chaos they did in the Red Sea. Dr. Badr, I will ask you the same question. Do you think that the current escalation will have repercussions on the Yemeni crisis and understanding? Before answering your question, there is an important issue, which is the paths of escalation and de-escalation. I think there are three determinants for the escalation. First thing is the war in Gaza, and all the options have been exhausted, and Israel now cannot do more than what it did. So we may witness de-escalation of the war in Gaza, and this will have an impact on the conflict in the Red Sea. There is another determinant. It's in Iran. Iran doesn't want this war to expand, and this is indicative that there is a tendency towards de-escalation. Iran doesn't want to get engaged in a holistic confrontation and to lose its partner in the Middle East. The third determinant is about the Houthis themselves. If you remember, the Houthis, they were marginalized after the understanding that took place with Saudi Arabia, and there was a rapprochement between the Saudis and Iran. So they feel that they did not have a role to play in the regional area. So for them, the Houthis, this war is important. They can be the only winners from this escalation, but the other players, maybe they will move towards the escalation. And the domestic situation in Yemen, I think the conflict in the Red Sea will make the situation in Yemen worse. And we have seen how the Yemeni currency has lost its value in the north compared to the south. So it's diminishing now, and the dollar price is increasing in the areas of the north, and this has an impact on the livelihood of people there, and this can lead to conflict inside the areas controlled by the Houthis. But for the conflict in Yemen between the legitimate government and the Houthis, I don't think that there is any rapprochement or a change in the situation. The Houthis now have the upper hand in Yemen, and they will have more demands. Ambassador Karim, if the escalation of the Houthis lasts for very long in the Red Sea, what can Egypt do to push the Houthis to suspend the threats in the Red Sea, especially that they know that Suez Canal can be significantly impacted than it is now if these threats continue? I think there are some signs that there is a dialogue between Egypt and the Houthis, and communication is by pushing Ansar Allah group to de-escalate, or at least to be more distinctive when they're willing to target vessels. So to distinguish between Israel-bound vessels and international vessels in the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. I think the efficiency of the communication that Egypt has can bear fruits, but the crisis in the Red Sea, if we want to deal with it without taking the regional situation in a holistic way, will not be successful. We need a regional approach that will mitigate the sources of the tension. We cannot deal with the Houthis issue if we don't have such holistic approach that will try to solve the different pillars of the conflict. Thank you. Mohammed, same question to you. In case the escalation lasts very long, would the Gulf state position change? Would they join the coalition of the US? Or would the Gulf state, which can have an impact on such a issue, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE, to exercise some pressure on the Houthis by working with the allies in Yemen? I think the UAE specifically, they manage 3 ports in the Red Sea, and they are impacted by the current situation. But the future is the main thing here. So if the conflict lasts very long by the Houthis, and the military operation by the US will see with this. It started with the piracy, and then the targeting with the drones, then ballistic missiles, and the wing drones, and then they started targeting trade vessels to oil vessels, and those that were sail-bound to other American vessels, and then to vessels that are not connected to Israel. Some people talk about cutting cables underwater. I don't think it will go that far, but we'll be seeing now maybe the prices oil, if they go up in the US, maybe it will have an impact. But for the Gulf state, they can see to what extent the current escalation can turn into a ground war. I think this is the main line here. And if the Houthis, they take orders from Iran, I don't think there will be escalation in this context because the Houthis, they want to win, and they will be very careful. Dr. Tashpiner, would we witness an expansion of the escalation so that Iran would join that escalation in the Red Sea, or even in the Gulf states, like for example, to close the Hormuz Strait, especially with the latest American strikes against Iran, proxies in Iran, in Syria and Iraq?
My understanding is that both the United States and Iran want to avoid a much larger scale of escalation at the military level. So both the United States and Iran know that the dynamics are dangerous right now, and there needs to be a proportional approach to what's going on the ground. So as long as we won't see a Houthi attack that is able to target, in addition to commercial shipping, the US Navy, casualties, I don't expect the United States to escalate beyond the current dynamics of proportional and targeted strikes. And I don't think it's in Iran's interest also to expand this. Let's remember that this is also an election year in the United States, and the economic dynamics of oil prices are very important. There has already been an uptick in oil prices in the United States. For President Biden, it is extremely important to present American foreign policy in the Middle East as one that is conducive to stability, not further military involvement. It's important to keep this under control for the United States.
Dr. Eleonora, if the escalation in the Red Sea expands, can we see a change in the European position so that Europe would join the airstrikes against the Houthis?
I don't think the EU and EU states are considering this hypothesis at this point. I think the EU states are still hoping that EU's US and UK limited airstrikes against the Houthi military sites can bring to some sort of de-escalation with regard to the Houthis attacks, and also that Prosperity Guardian can, at the end of the day, bring some stability in the area. I think that in case of further escalation, the EU will likely step up the support to regional countries, for instance, Oman, in order to advance diplomatic talks and negotiations with the Houthis with the purpose to decrease the attacks in the Red Sea region. And the Sultan of Oman is at the forefront, in my view, in the EU diplomatic engagement in the region, since Oman can talk with the Houthis and also with Iran. So I think the Muscat remains a pillar also of the EU strategy in the region in order to decrease the crisis. With the consciousness and that the EU has limited diplomatic leverage in the region, unfortunately, and so it needs to rely upon especially GCC states in order to advance and pursue also its own interests.
Now we'll move to the third and last theme, and it will be about political arrangements and security and the regional arrangement and alternatives. And I'll start with Mr. Majid. Do you think that the Houthi threats of the maritime navigation in one of the main water corridors in the world will become a card in the future to be used by the Houthis, so that they will use them when they want to achieve some gains to put pressure on the regional or international actors? Definitely. I think that the Houthis now, they have a very important card. It's like they have just he discovered the importance of the Red Sea, not the symbolic one, but also the political cost that to be on the Red Sea. So this will lead them to change their approach and their claims. I cannot imagine that the Red Sea will stop at the initial political demands that they had before. It will be naive for them because they are very sensitive and smart. So they will raise the bar for their demands and what they want from Saudi Arabia, given the negotiation they have, especially as you mentioned that they managed to get away with their actions in the Red Sea. This, and the second level, the political response of the Iran, of the Houthis, of any elements that would threaten the access that will come from Bab al-Mandab. One of the old dreams that the Iranians have is that to have the tentacles all over the area in Bab al-Mandab also, and this will make a difference in the region, given the role of the Houthis in the region. The changes will not affect only the Yemeni issue, but also dynamics of the regional issues. Thank you. Mr. Mohammed, how can regional countries to neutralize the Houthi threats of maritime navigation and achieve the security in the sea? And like the control of the Hodeidah, or not allowing the Houthis to control it, maybe it will be like the approach of piracy in Somalia, and to to play an economic role in the Asian and regional economy. He will be linked with the international economy, but there is a security approach. The current coalition is limited in its scope and its means. In my opinion, in terms of the planning, the best way for security cooperation is the Council of Red Sea. But the Council of Red Sea was not activated. I think it's all need to be defined and who takes part in it, because it deals with different aspects, not only the security one, it's based on the Asian and common interest, and it also deals with the energy security, environment security. So this is one of the things that need to be considered for long-lasting security of supply chain. One of the things you spoke about, the corridor between India and Europe and the land routes, and even the airway between Iraq and Turkey. All of this is based on supply chains. This should be the foundation for any cooperation. Dr. Karim Albadr, in your opinion, what is the possibility of developing the Arab corridor between Jordan and Egypt, so it includes Gulf states, so that it goes from, it can link Asia and Europe? Is that possible? Yes, there is a possibility, but this kind of regional mega project based on economic interest, because such projects, when they are linked to a specific regional situation and it can escalate, maybe there will be a huge cost for them to achieve them. And it's necessary to manage this project not based on the exceptional situation that are happening at specific time and then will disappear later, but it should be based on economic feasibility and geopolitics and the economic situation. And just one more thing about the regional arrangement. The Asian, in the Asian, we are witnessing many arrangements between certain countries based on cooperation on specific issue, including the Council of Red Sea and I2U2, and also the missions of the joint missions. All those arrangements have proved unsuccessful in dealing with such exceptional situation, because the situation in Yemen and the Red Sea is linked to that, and all this arrangement could not fill the gap of lacking a general framework that would deal with all the challenges. That framework can be different, but it's important to highlight that that framework can be limited because it only handles exceptional and emergency cases instead of handling the whole situation. And for the Palestinian cause, we did not see an impact on the Asian before, like we see it now, maybe since 1973. So we need to deal with the regional situation in a holistic way, because it can be unsuccessful if we deal with the smaller issue only. Dr. Tashbiner, till now, it has been proved that the American strategy to protect maritime navigation in the strategic corridors in the region, like the Arab Gulf and the Hormuz Strait and the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Arab Sea, is not efficient given the threats stemming from Iran and its proxies. So my question, is it possible that we will see an American strategy, a new one in this regard? And is it possible that the coalition of the Guardian of Prosperity will be a durable one and would expand to include all countries of the region?
So when you look from the angle of the United States, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, only months ago, only probably 3 months ago, had written an article for Foreign Affairs where he was saying that the Middle East has never been more stable in the last decade than now. And in a matter of weeks, things dramatically changed. And now we have